and the terminations persist to transpire at the Department of Justice, succeeding Pam Bondi's humiliation and mortifying an unstable achievement in presence of the House Judiciary Committee. Except it's not Pam Bondi's termination. They merely terminated Abigail Slater, a minimally recognized but extremely influential administrator of the Department of Justice's Antitrust Section, because she's received crosswise with Donald Trump, especially about the procurement of CNN's parent organization, where Donald Trump possesses an invested concern in and possesses a dispute of concern in. Abigail Slater has confronted the technology corporations. Numerous of them are in Donald Trump's rear container or alternatively. And she ultimately wore out her acceptance 11 periods into her position. This is not about Abigail Slater. This is about the American buyer presently not possessing anyone to oppose against Donald Trump's attempts to elevate values, to render elements uncompetitive, to advantage his technology associate companions. And who's going to compensate the value? Literally, you and me and the American buyer. I'm Michael Popok. You're on Midas Touch and Legal AF. Let's discuss about this. In the previous 24 durations, Donald Trump has terminated a collection of individuals. He terminated following merely 24 durations, a U.S. counsel that he had designated to be the U.S. counsel in the Northern District of New York. The individual rendered it 24 durations. That introduces us to Abigail Slater. This is all in the aftermath. It's like Donald Trump requires to terminate somebody following observing Pam Bondi's achievement, but he doesn't recognize who. So presently, he's going to proceed to the subsequent individual on the roster, which is Abigail Slater. Now, Abigail Slater had been with the Department of Justice for an extended duration in antitrust. Antitrust antitrust control is the proceeding following organizations who, through procurement of their rivals, render markets reduced competitive to the buyer, signifying your values are elevated. So when a substantial cellular telephone organization procures a rival and receives a substantial market portion, that signifies they possess the capacity through market influence to elevate values, and there's zero rival to equilibrium it off. Correct? If you procure all of your rivals, you can merely elevate values as elevated as you can. And who's going to cease that? The Antitrust Section of the Department of Justice through their examinations. Numerous elements, like blends of organizations, have to fundamentally be authorized and be approved through this Department of Justice Antitrust Section. But we've been documenting for exceeding a period that Donald Trump has contaminated it, permitting insiders, permitting enterprise lobbyists to receive inside of the sacred Department of Justice Antitrust Section to control strategy. Now, that hasn't ceased Abigail Slater because she's a profession antitrust counsel and a citizen servant. So she has persisted to proceed following the Warner Brothers Netflix blend. She's essentially possessed Paramount, which is possessed by the Ellison household, intimate associates with Donald Trump, efficiently marginalized. Paramount desires to acquire Warner Brothers, encompassing CNN, but Netflix progressed in the center, and it all arrives down to the antitrust section. Now, Donald Trump possesses his substantial heavy influence on the measurement because he desires the Ellison household, who also possess Oracle, to procure Warner Brothers and receive their influences on CNN, providing Donald Trump yet another non-independent information organization under his management to append to CBS and 60 Minutes and ABC. And then he would append one of the superior assets, CNN, through his companion procuring it. Now, Donald Trump merely previous period possessed an indication. He possessed a characteristic that somewhat informed us that Abigail Slater's duration on this planet was not extended, at minimum, as the administrator of the antitrust section. Genuinely, two indications. One, when he was questioned about the procurement, he rendered an extremely fascinating statement that he would no extended be engaged. He communicated he was going to be engaged with who receives the reward of CNN and who receives the reward of Warner Brothers resources. And then abruptly previous period he communicated, negative, negative, I'm not going to be engaged. My Department of Justice is going to manage that, which we recognize he's obtained and completely manages. But here's the segment. You are intimate with the Ellisons, who are endeavoring to cease a combination between Warner Bros. Discovery and Netflix. This arrangement might transform the composition of the information as we recognize it. Are you individually going to receive engaged in that arrangement? I haven't been engaged. I must communicate. I assume I'm regarded to be an extremely substantial president. I've been contacted by both aspects. It's the two aspects, but I've determined I shouldn't be engaged. The Justice Department will manage it. Acceptable. In what approach? Merely examining at it to observe if it's render a judgment. I signify there's a concept that one of the organizations is too substantial and it shouldn't be permitted to execute it, and the alternative organization is communicating something alternative about you recognize they're criticizing, but you're not going to interfere, including though you're intimate with the situation out of each alternative and they'll be a champion. So, affirmative, his Department of Justice is management, but he doesn't desire Abigail Slater to be managed. So she was terminated as a to receive her out of the approach for Donald Trump to power and endeavor to grant the reward of CNN and Warner Brothers resources to the Ellison household. I signify you, it couldn't be any more unmistakable than that. Let's discuss about something zero individual desires to discuss about. What transpires when you expire? Because regrettably, it's going to transpire to you, to me. But you can be arranged with trust and will digital estate strategizing. I'll be honest. Estate strategizing is one of those elements that genuinely is simple to delay. Substantial of us are guardians, residence possessors, partners, or we're maintaining for aging guardians and offspring, and we recognize it's significant, but it merely positions on the task roster. Observe, I've undoubtedly been guilty of that in the previous, and then you comprehend something as significant as identifying a guardian for your offspring shouldn't be abandoned to probability. That's why I appreciate trust and will. You can generate an estate strategy digital in as minimal as 30 moments, and the system guides you through a simple sequential instructed procedure. If you possess inquiries, they including present optional individual assistance from counsels in your state, and they're devoted to rendering estate strategizing manageable because everyone possesses something to abandon behind. Don't pause until it's too delayed. Defend your appreciated individuals today, tomorrow, and past with trust and will, the most relied identity in digital estate strategizing. Proceed to trustandwill.com LegalAF and receive 20% reduction. That's trustandwill.com LegalAF to receive your 20% reduction. Trustandwill.com LegalAF. The alternative justification that Abigail Slater recognized the composition was on the barrier that her profession was going to be terminated brief merely 11 periods in is because Donald Trump also pardoned AAA individual identified Tim Leiweke, who possessed a organization designated Oakview, where he controlled the proposals in sequence to establish certain that Oakview acquired a agreement. It's designated proposal controlling. It's when you possess what's anticipated to be competitive rivalry between rival proposals, acceptable in sequence to execute an agreement. Correct? A petition for suggestion proceeds out, and RFP proposals arrive and the most minimal proposer, legislation, most minimal expense provider is anticipated to acquire as extended as they satisfy all the standards of the proposal. He controlled it to establish certain that he would receive it, and he was transmitted and he was determined by Donald Trump's personal section of fairness in the initial period guided by Abigail Slater, and Donald Trump pardoned him. Donald Trump merely pardoned him for this proposal controversy. So if Abigail Slater didn't recognize her duration was concluded, then she undoubtedly recognizes it presently. And then you receive this tepid, you recognize appreciation for your Operation Digital Platform transmission from Pam Bondi. But let's merely identify this out for what it is. She has proceeded following I'm discussing about Abigail Slater presently. Apple operated by Tim Cook, superior companions with Donald Trump, correct? And Donald Trump doesn't appreciate that. And Tim Cook doesn't appreciate that. She's proceeded following Google and successfully proceeded following them connected to advertisements that you observe on Google and YouTube. And we recognize that Google and YouTube are substantial supporters of Donald Trump as well. So when you examine at the sectors that she's confronted, you recognize information, technology, companions of Donald Trump, numerous of them contributed to his inauguration or his reception hall or both, or were up at the stage during his inauguration, where instead of associates and household, it was merely technology. Associates in the reverse, Tim Cook and the administrator of Meta Facebook, and you recognize Zuckerberg and all that. Naturally, Abigail Slater positioning elevated in protection of appropriate antitrust control was going to be on the approach out. And Donald Trump communicated audibly in that recording, I am going to maintain out of it. I'm going to possess the Department of Justice, execute it, do it. What he genuinely signified to communicate is, I received to eliminate Abigail Slater because she's in the approach of what I desire to accomplish with rendering our nation not competitive, establishing certain that my companions can procure the organizations that they desire to procure, and not possess any opposition from the antitrust section. Initial in the period we documented on lobbyists. This has never transpired in the chronicle of the antitrust section. You recognize? You're not anticipated to possess cross-contamination or contamination. You're not anticipated to permit lobbying to arrive into the antitrust section. Counsels representing Discovery or Warner Brothers or Google, Apple, any of the organizations in pharmaceutical sphere, any of the organizations that are going to interface with the antitrust section. They transmit their counsels. They don't transmit their lobbyists. But to Donald Trump, everything is commercial, correct? Everything is enterprise. And so he permitted, and Slater positioned in conclusion to it, a lobbyist to receive inside of the antitrust section to endeavor to influence for new controls that would control them as a sector. That's incorrect. That's contaminated. Senator Elizabeth Warren, combating each interval for us, communicated that the rejection or termination of Abigail Slater is contamination again in our presence. And I'll be on documentation once again. This Department of Justice is the most contaminated Department of Justice completely obtained by the presidency, completely obtained by a criminal president. And this is the outcome. 0 uncertainty why we observe U.S. counsels receive terminated following. Observe at what we've merely examined at in the previous period. You've received at 6 distinct U.S. counsels who have been rejected by tribunals and possessed to withdraw in humiliation because they were not qualified. They couldn't receive validated at the Senate, and they were prohibitedly designated by Pam Bondi. Departed. Encompassing Lindsay Halligan, encompassing Alina Habba, those nearest to Donald Trump, you recognize. Then you've received, including the individuals that they're endeavoring to motivate to accept the occupation, are enduring, briefer than you recognize, like the duration existence for a U.S. counsel is evidently 24 durations. We merely possessed one substituted following 24 durations. The guiding counsel prosecutor for one of the 93 government territories rendered it 24 durations. And presently you've received Abigail Slater, which is representative of a wider illness and contamination and disease with the Department of Justice identified Donald Trump and Pam Bondi. So I'm going to persist to monitor it acceptable correct for here for you. I'm Midas Touch. Accept a instance, transition over to Legal AF YouTube platform, impact the complementary follow control. Can't receive your satisfaction of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we constructed the Legal AF Substack. Each duration, we reference something in a hot segment, whether it's a tribunal submission or a verbal contention, arrive over to the Substack. You'll locate the tribunal submission and the verbal contention there, encompassing a daily summary that I execute designated. Pause for it. Morning AF. What alternative? All the alternative contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We received some new documentation, we received conversations, we received advertisement complementary adaptations of the transmission and hot segments where Legal AF on Substack. Arrive over presently to complimentary follow.